Hello, this is Calvin Andrassi, and we're going to be talking about macroeconomics in a nutshell. So, what is macroeconomics? What's it all about? Let's learn about that today. Alrighty. So, macroeconomics is the study of decision-making, structure, performance, and the behavior of actors in the economy at the regional, state, national, or international level, which means at the larger scale. And this is contrasted with microeconomics that looks at individual actors in the market system, the individual producers and firms and whatnot that are engaging in trade and exchange. Okay? One of the core and most important elements of macroeconomics is to understand how we measure the economy, and the most common approach to that is to examine what we call gross domestic product. Okay? And gross domestic product is the total economic output of a country in a given year. So it is the sum total of every bit of market activity that takes place over the course of a year. In addition to that, we need to know a little bit about basic macroeconomic theory to understand macroeconomics in its ideal form, or the way that we believe it should be playing out. Okay, and for that there are two main schools of thought. There is classical economic theory, and there is Keynesian economic theory. Okay, so classical economic theory, it examines the market structure of a given economic system, and it tends to believe that markets are capable of self-regulating and will find some level of equilibrium, a balance in time with regard to wages and the prices of the goods and services, and believes that it is responsive to and flexible in adjusting to the changes that happen with regard to the supply and the demand of those goods and services. And for hundreds of years, the general belief in the economic system was that the market will figure it out, essentially, as time progresses. More recently, the establishment of Keynesian economics came from realizing that there are what we call sticky wages and sticky prices, meaning that wages and prices are not so quick to change necessarily with supply and demand changes. So in that sense, Keynesian economics believes that there are ways in which the market can be influenced, and generally it is going to be influenced by the government, which will use both monetary and fiscal policy to try to stimulate demand and potentially stabilize an unstable economy, one that's getting too hot or one that's slowing down in terms of production and sales. Okay, so some people tend to favor the classical economic theories, particularly more conservative individuals politically, whereas individuals that tend to be more progressive tend to favor Keynesian economic theories. But the fact of the matter is that both of these are some degree of reality. Now, classical economic theory, obviously, Keynesian theory comes from noticing the ways in which classical economics kind of fails. But there is this general sense that, for the most part, markets are pretty good at self-regulating to a certain extent. But at the same time, sometimes it needs a little bit of help. So there are advantages to kind of sticking with a more classical theoretical approach in policy making, and there are definitely benefits to taking more of a Keynesian approach in policy making, right? The more classically motivated economic theory tends to be, the more it tends to favor again, market self-regulation, which in turn means that essentially those businesses that are not viable will tend to go away, whereas those businesses that are more successful will tend to survive. Whereas Keynesian economics tries to make sure that there are no failures in the economic system by pumping it full of money and the ability of individuals to engage in acquiring goods and services at the market, thereby ensuring the continued existence of business firms and high levels of productivity. Okay. One of the main issues, there are two real main issues in macroeconomics that need to be examined and discussed. The first of which is unemployment. The second is inflation. So let's talk a little bit about unemployment. There are four main kinds of unemployment, but it's arguable that that seasonal unemployment is a type of cyclical unemployment, but we'll get to that in a second here. The first type of unemployment is what is known as frictional unemployment, and that is when individuals become unemployed because they are moving to a new location, or they're between jobs, or perhaps when they're entering the market for the first time and they're sending out their resumes, trying to land their first job. So that period in which they start looking for a job for whatever reason until they actually get that job would be a period of frictional unemployment, and that is probably the most typical type of unemployment that most people are aware of. Certainly, as potentially students looking to get jobs, frictional unemployment is something that a lot of people will have to contend with as they move forward from their academic careers into their professional ones. Okay? Structural unemployment is essentially the result of the economy changing, society changing, right? It is unemployment that arises because there's sort of a mismatch between job requirements and the skills and the qualifications of its workers, right? And oftentimes that stems from new technology coming into the field, and the need for people to essentially learn the skills to be able to utilize that technology. It can also result from shifts in consumer preferences, changes in industry structure, things like that, right? So, I imagine back in the day, you had a bunch of people making, horse buggies and horse whips, and then the automobile comes around, and you have people needing to, or rather the car manufacturers needing people to be able to produce a car and all the different various components of it, right? So the people who were the buggy whip salesmen now have to transition over and build the skills to be able to create an automobile now, right? And until those skills are acquired, that is sort of the result, or that's sort of what results in, I should say, structural unemployment. Okay? And then the last main category of unemployment is cyclical unemployment, which is unemployment that stems from an economic downturn and a decreased demand for goods. So, if there's a recession happening, there's not as many sales of the good or service that a producer is creating. So there's no need to have as many people there, rather, to produce those goods and services. So that's where you tend to see a lot of layoffs and things like that, and that's what cyclical unemployment is all about. Kind of in the same vein is seasonal unemployment. So, people who get retail jobs in the winter months because they are preparing for the holiday season rush, and then after the holiday season passes, they lose their jobs. That would be an example of seasonal unemployment. Okay. So then the other major economic issue is inflation, which is the sustained general increase in the price of goods and services over a given period of time. And in general, everything gets more expensive over time. It's not your your own personal perspective. It's actually a thing that's happening as the goods and services become more abundant, become more plentiful, and become and once the demand catches up with the supply, generally there's oftentimes that market increase in the price in general. But there are a number of ways to kind of examine inflation. We have the Consumer Price Index. It tracks the average price change of a basket of goods and services. Essentially, there is a group of products that tend to be purchased in significant quantities by the public at large that represent that basket of goods and services. And those are the typical items that are bought by consumers. And tracking the changes in the prices of those goods and services is what the Consumer Price Index is all about. The Producer Price Index is kind of the other end of that. It's for the firms. It measures the sales price changes of producers for their goods and services over time. Okay? And then we have a third concept here, which is purchasing power parity. And it compares standards of living, growth, inflation of different countries by essentially standardizing and finding a common currency or utilizing a basket of goods approach to see, just generally how much certain items or goods and services and just in general the things that are necessary to get by in certain countries, how much do those differ in price from one country to the next. Okay. And of course we have the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank is an entity. It's not like a typical bank where you go and get your money and you store your money, but rather it is sort of the if there were a hierarchy of banks, it's kind of the CEO of the banking system. It's what sets the interest rates, that are there to affect any, potential excessive or not enough spending. It's ultimately responsible for regulating the amount of money that is borrowed in the system, and in being able to manipulate that, kind of like from the Keynesian approach. It's able to affect demand, potentially to stabilize prices if there is an excessive amount of inflation. Okay, and we're going to learn all about that in future chapters as well. Okay, so then let's talk a little bit about the causes of inflation. Okay, so there are a couple of different things that could potentially lead to inflationary periods. First and foremost, we have demand pull inflation. Okay, so this is examining inflation from demand, which is the ability and the willingness of individuals to purchase goods and services. So demand pull inflation is when the aggregate demand, the collective demand for goods and services is higher than the collective supply of those goods and services, right? So take, for example, good that everybody needs to buy. Let's talk about groceries here, right? So let's say all of a sudden there is this big trend and artichokes become really popular. If there is a huge demand for artichokes and there's only a limited supply of those artichokes at various markets throughout, let's just use the United States as an example, throughout the United States. If there's not enough artichokes around to meet the supply, there's going to be a general increase in the price. Quite simple. Cost push inflation, that comes from the other end. So as the costs of production increase, firms are going to increase their prices to be able to maintain their profit margins, right? If all of a sudden, let's say you want to purchase a hamburger, right? If all of a sudden the price of ground beef doubles, that's going to cut into a business's bottom line, so they're probably going to increase the price of their hamburgers that they're selling as a final finished product to be able to cover those increased costs. Okay? And then we have built-in or wage price inflation, and that's the general idea that as wages increase, employees are going to be able to pay more for goods and services, ergo the demand is going to increase, thereby there is an increase in prices, right? So there was a big concern as the minimum wage kept increasing in California. Now it's, getting pretty high up there, that this would result in wage price inflation, right? So as the minimum wage hit $15, and then I believe it's $20 now for fast food workers. Significant concern that that's going to ultimately result in a general increase in prices at the market. And to some extent there has been inflation, but it is not the amount of inflation that you would generally expect just from wage price inflation. So there's a lot more going on than that is apparent, and we can always discuss that in future videos. But yeah, as prices, as wages tend to go up, it means that there is more available for people to spend, and in so doing, individuals are going to be more willing and able to purchase goods, so a firm will be able to increase its prices and be able to maintain a certain level of profit by having that balanced equilibrium of the price and the overall demand. Okay? And then we have another inflationary concept to discuss, which is hyperinflation. And that's not a good situation, right? Your economy is not doing so hot when you have a period of hyperinflation. And that is when the price increases beyond the ability of the market and the economy to adjust to those price increases. Is generally seen as 50% or more in a month. This happened during the Great Depression, where essentially, the old adage is that people had to take wheelbarrows full of money to market to purchase a loaf of bread, which is not untrue. I believe the record still is for Hungary's pengő. It inflated to a degree that I think for like about $15 or so, you could have purchased all of the pengő that ever existed in Hungary based on its value. Really, really horrible situation during that was, I think, after the either the First or the Second World War. Don't quote me on which war it was. One of the world wars. It was just a really, really bad situation. I'm sorry, is that the fillér? I think it was the fillér instead of the pengő, and it got replaced. Anyway, it's in the book. You can go ahead and look at that, or look up Hungarian inflation. It's quite a really fascinating bit of world history, just to see that money can become so worthless if the economy collapses. Okay? And that leads us to the notion of a business cycle. Okay? And the economy does follow a cyclical pattern, right? It is dynamic, it is ever-changing, and there are certain patterns that you can identify in macroeconomics. The economy is going to expand and grow at some point. It's going to reach its peak for that particular cyclical situation. Then it will enter into a recession, or rather a contraction, I should say. A recession is 2 or more quarters where there is a economic decline or downturn. Prolonged economic decline and downturn results in what's called a depression. Again, the late 1920s and early 1930s, we were in the middle of the Great Depression. That was just a situation in which the economy was just, completely tanking after a significant period of growth in what we call the Roaring Twenties. And then at some point, you kind of hit rock bottom, and that's called the trough. And then you engage in economic recovery and then go back into the expansionary period. Now, with Keynesian economics, we've been more or less able to stave off recessions and depressions for a significant period of time. The notable exception, of course, being in 2007-2008, when you saw the Great Recession take place as a result of mostly a housing market bubble burst, essentially, and some shady practices with regard to that. And again, that's something that we can talk about in the future as well. But the big concern is that, in having fiscal and monetary policy come and rectify the system that's building up debt, which is increasing our GDP to debt ratio, and there are concerns that engaging in these kinds of government interventions might ultimately result in some pretty big and nasty economic declines in the future, and we're just kicking the can. So we can feel free to debate that as much as you want. Since this is a YouTube video, you can leave a comment if you like in the comment section. And again, we can always talk about the pros and cons of these types of policies in the future. Okay? And then the last element here is that I want to talk about all the different ways that you can go ahead and measure the economy. So we started with the gross domestic product, right? It's, again, kind of the sum total of all the activities that take place. Just general consumption and investment and government expenditure, imports and exports, that's all going to be part of the GDP. And, there are a bunch of different formulas that go into calculating various elements of the economy. Looking at unemployment rate and inflation rates here. This R sub U is, the rate of unemployment, the rate of inflation, based on prices, and the number of individuals that are unemployed based on the overall labor participation rate. There's all sorts of different factors that go into how you ultimately are able to measure the economy. But there are also alternatives to just looking at pure economic activity in determining how healthy your economy is. So the United Nations uses the Human Development Index, which incorporates other elements than pure economic activity, looking at the overall, essentially the health and welfare of individuals in a given society. New Economic Foundation has the Happy Planet Index that looks at general level of happiness in individuals. GNH USA's Growth National Happiness Index is another measure that incorporates, again, other elements than necessarily just economic factors. How environmentally healthy is a country? What about access to education? What about just the general ability of individuals to get by, and how happy are they in their day-to-day lives, right? So there's a lot of debate as to how we can actually determine how really strong an economy is that goes beyond just the total amount of production, right? And those are things to consider So feel free to look into these different types of indices, and certainly, come to understand, what goes into measuring the economy in the traditional way using things like the gross domestic product. All right. So with that, we're going to move on to getting into some of the more nitty-gritty about macroeconomics, and I look forward to continuing on this journey with you.